Hello and welcome to 7 Days in Europe. It's that time of year again, nominations time, for the European Parliament's Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. Last year it went to two Iranians, a filmmaker and human rights defender. This year the shortlist of 7 nominees is truly varied. But taking the most nominations by far is the 16-year-old Pakistani girl Malala Yousafzai. Although the debate has now been postponed, this week also saw the return of a familiar and thorny theme, medical devices like breast implants and hip replacements. Joining me now to discuss these issues, as well as the work of one of the committees she serves on, petitions, is Margrete Auken, Danish MEP representing the Greens and European Free Alliance. First, though, let's kick off with our habitual round of quick-fire questions demanding a simple yes or no answer. Ready? OK, let's play. Did you support the nomination of Malala Yousafzai?
No.
Do you think the Sakharov Prize makes a difference?
Yes.
In your spare time, you're a Lutheran priest. Do you get a sense among young people that they've been forgotten?
Yes.
There's a sense of excitement out there, do you think, at the upcoming European elections?
Yeah.
Do you think Parliament is trusted?
It's not known. No, sorry, no.
If you look at the influence of lobby groups here in Parliament, is it right that Parliament is trusted just slightly more than the other European institutions?
Yeah.
The EU frequently boasts of its globally leading role in combating climate change. Is it right to boast it?
No.
Is it doing enough?
No.
Denmark is renowned for its Euroscepticism. Would you like an in-out referendum such as Britain is proposing?
No.
Would you like a reduction in powers in the EU?
No.
Many MEPs are calling for a halt to talks on EU-US trade agreement until the US spying scandal is resolved. Do you believe that's right?
Yes.
The bong marks an end to that. We'll return to some of these questions later on in the discussion. But let's turn to the Sakharov question first of all. I wonder if you could look at why your group decided to support Edward Snowden. Do you believe that Edward Snowden is the whistleblower to beat all other whistleblowers? Well,
it's not important. It's important he's an important whistleblower. And I think that, well, my daily fight here is for transparency, it's for openness. I'm fighting for having good administration in the EU institutions. I'm calling for the Ombudsman, the Commission to put forward a proposal on good administration, and that is transparency, transparency, transparency.
But that doesn't explain why you believe Edward Snowden should receive the Sakharov Prize above all those other contenders.
Yes, but no, but you say, well, I would be happy also that he gets the prize. That's not my problem, and I have others I could support. But I think it's important that we tell the US, the rest of the world, that we find it outrageous that you criminalize a person who tells us about criminalities in the power.
OK, let's return to that question in a moment. Hold that thought. First, though, here's a short roundup of the main stories in the European Parliament with Caroline Grasso.
Les Européens ont des droits. À l'occasion du rapport annuel 2012 sur les activités de la Commission des pétitions, les députés ont rappelé l'importance de cette plateforme d'échange entre les citoyens et les législateurs européens. Il reste beaucoup à faire, mais la voix des pétitions reste le moyen pour un citoyen de faire entendre sa voix ou de dénoncer une violation de ses droits. Des méthodes européennes concertées pour mettre fin à la mafia. La commission parlementaire Crime, spécialement créée en 2012, a présenté son rapport final d'activité mardi. Son objectif, proposer des solutions à échelle européenne aux problèmes de crime organisé, de corruption et de blanchiment d'argent. Les nominés 2013 du prix Sakharov pour la liberté de penser sont désormais connus. Parmi les 7 nominés, Edward Snowden, informaticien accusé d'espionnage par les États-Unis pour avoir révélé les détails d'un programme de surveillance de masse à la presse. Malala Yousafzai, jeune militante pakistanaise pour le droit à l'éducation des filles, figure également sur la liste. Ils seront départagés pendant la session plénière d'octobre. Le prix Sakharov du Parlement européen récompense chaque année des défenseurs des droits de l'homme et de la liberté d'expression.
Another quick thought on the Sakharov Prize before we move on to the challenge of medical devices. What, in your view, does it achieve? I mean, are there any notable changes that you've noticed in the awarding of previous Sakharov Prizes?
Difficult to say, but I think that people, well, I have been signing for a Ethiopian because I've been dealing a lot with Ethiopia. I'm supporting the Green Group on Snowden, but I want this man to be mentioned because that can safeguard him in Ethiopia, which can be important. That's something. I was, a few years ago, the leading force in breaking the silence, the organization in Israel, the military organization, telling about what they have been doing in Hebron against the Palestinians. And it was absolutely important that we, from the Europe, told that kind of, breaking the silence.
So it's a way of upholding European values, for
Yes.
sure, but are you seeing
Yes.
changes actually on the ground?
It's difficult to say because, these kind of changes is not coming like this here.
OK, let's turn now to the thorny question of medical devices. A vote in the Environment Committee was due to take place this week, but has now been postponed for technical reasons, they say. Can you explain to me, first of all, what are these medical devices and what is the problem vis-à-vis thousands of European citizens?
I have 2 artificial knees and I have an artificial hip and I have 1 tooth repaired. That is medical devices. I have, all kind of implants, helps, and it's used a lot. And what we want is much better control. And what I've especially am fighting for on this dossier, as a dossier on clinical trials, is transparency again. Openness, the pharmaceutical industry, whatever they've approved producing implants or medicines, full access to the raw data from their trials. Because if we get that, you will get a much more safe life with the pharmaceutical industry.
And if you take the example, for example, of breast implants or hip replacements, I mean, what dangers are people who are extremely vulnerable in the first place facing now?
Well, I hope really that we will improve this year. But if you suddenly, for instance, I think breast implants are something different because they only need it if you have been in a surgery. But the hips and so on, people need them to more or less survive. And if they are not okay, then they go into your body. You can't say, well, we just take it out again, which by itself is dramatic. But then it's merging into your body. And if they are sending out a kind of metal dust or what it could be, or something else which really can threaten your all-over well-being, we have good products. And if they're coming with new products, we must make sure that it's an improvement and not the opposite.
We have time just for one more issue, which I know is close to your heart. That's the committee meeting of petitions this week and the review of everything that was achieved over 2012. Did you see any particular patterns emerging as to what gripped European citizens that they felt they wanted to lodge a petition about?
Well, it's broad, but I've been dealing very much with the waste issues in Italy, but it's all over, and I think that's a very important issue because it's linking to also a resource strategy, what we are facing in changing the industry into a much more green, renewable industry, to a modern industry. So, I love very much to deal with people's very close problems in the Italy waste Naples. And then how to involve people, because we need people there, and to involve also industry in green technologies. And if we should be able to, survive in this world without destroying. So I like very much what we've been doing on the waste issue, but we have many other issues too.
OK, Margrete Auken, thank you very much indeed for joining us. There are thousands more petitions out there, but we just don't have any more time.
No, that's really a pity. But thank you very much for inviting me.
And thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Timothy, thanks very much for coming in. You're watching 7 Days in Europe. There's something quite dark and spooky about the phrase drugs precursor, something which calls to mind white-coated scientists cooking up sophisticated but potentially fatal chemical compounds, which are then unleashed on society as the latest batch of designer drugs. Of course, there's a perfectly legal chemical precursors industry. They're used in the manufacturing of paint, textiles and plastics, for example. Here in Europe, however, MEPs are seeking to prevent their diversion for the production of crack cocaine or heroin. It's no easy task, as chemists working for criminals are able to stay one step ahead of the law. One MEP, my guest, Timothy Kirkhope, who represents the European Conservatives and Reformist Group, is at the forefront of Parliament's efforts. We'll come to this question in depth in a moment. First, though, our habitual round of quick-fire questions, not necessarily connected to our topic of the moment, in which you get to answer yes or no. Are you ready?
As I ever will be, yes.
Let's go then. Timothy Kirkhope, if the Conservatives win the next election in the UK, do you believe there will be an in-out referendum on EU membership?
Yes, I do.
If that referendum was held now, do you think the British people would vote out?
Difficult to say.
Is it your view that a partial opt-out of some EU areas, like justice, is better than total pull-out?
Yes.
Is it better or worse for the UK to be in the EU?
Better.
Do you think more British people will vote in the upcoming European elections than they did in 2009 when the turnout was pretty dismal?
I hope so.
There'll be a protest, do you think? There'll be a protest vote, do you think, if there are more people, or a representation that Europe is starting to matter to British people?
I'm sure they think it matters.
We've just had nominations for the Sakharov Prize. Did you support the nomination of Malala Yousafzai?
Yes.
With the increasing capacity of criminals to design chemical compounds for drugs, do you believe that we've lost the battle against designer drugs?
No.
That's all we've got time for at the moment. We'll come back to some of these questions later on in due course. But first of all, let me ask you a fairly basic question, which is for a description of what a drug precursor is.
It's a substance which, on its own, may or may not be positive in its use or positive in its application. But it's also a substance which, if mixed or synthesized with other substances or a substance, can produce extremely negative effects, particularly in relation to drugs or the manufacture of drugs.
And what are you seeing in Europe right now that would cause alarm and cause you, as an elected representative, to draw up legislation to combat that?
Well, over the last few years, a considerable number of young people all around Europe, and I give in the case of the UK, in 2012, for instance, 52 young people died as a result of experimentation with what were thought to be perfectly legal substances being taken and used as if they were full-blown drugs. They died. My concerns are that the substances that we used were and are legal, and consequently, I wanted to investigate. I want to find out what's going on here. And what I found out, and others have found out here in the European Union, is that these substances need to be controlled if they are to cause no harm to young people in particular, but to the population, the wider population as a whole.
OK, let me ask you to hold that thought right there. We'll come back to it in just a moment. But let's first watch a report on drug precursors made by my colleague Julie Martin.
C'est un exercice de routine pour la douane canine à l'aéroport national de Bruxelles. Les chiens sont lancés à la recherche de drogue dans des cargos de marchandises. Mais les nouvelles substances psychoactives leur échappent bien souvent.
Elles ne correspondent à aucun profil bien connu. Donc de ce fait, elles sont très difficilement détectables par toutes les techniques traditionnelles, genre chien ou détecteur ou autres techniques classiques.
Aujourd'hui, tout ce que peuvent faire les services des douanes, c'est se mettre dans la peau du consommateur. Ils surveillent la toile, car un seul clic sur le net suffit en effet à commander des substances dites légales et pourtant souvent très dangereuses. À l'Institut national belge de criminalistique, Vincent Areshka dirige un laboratoire où les drogues et d'autres substances saisies sont analysées en profondeur.
Il peut arriver que les drogues détectées ne soient pas des drogues illégales, parce qu'actuellement le marché des stupéfiants est en très grande évolution. Et ce qui se passe actuellement, en fait, c'est que les chimistes underground prennent des structures actives et les modifient dans un but de contourner principalement la législation.
Benzo Fury, Stoned ou Jamaican Gold, les noms sont prometteurs, mais sur ces 8 sachets analysés, seulement 2 contiennent des substances illégales.
Les autres sachets contiennent des substances potentiellement psychoactives, à savoir des substances dont la structure est relativement proche ou proche de substances psychoactives connues.
Vendues notamment comme sel de bain, certaines de ces substances sont présentées sous forme de gélules. Sur d'autres est inscrite une interdiction au moins de 18 ans, de quoi attirer la curiosité des douaniers.
Ces substances n'ont absolument pas été étudiées au niveau pharmacologique, donc on ne connaît pas leur effet, mais potentiellement on sait qu'elles sont dangereuses.
73 nouvelles substances psychoactives de ce type ont été découvertes en 2012, soit près du double par rapport à 2011. Un système d'alerte précoce a été mis en place au niveau européen pour repérer les nouvelles substances dangereuses et les interdire ensuite. Pour Peter Blankart, c'est toute la législation qu'il faut revoir.
For the moment, it works with a list, so every substance on that list is illegal, which means that every substance that is not on the list is legal by definition. Yes. So what we are going to do in the future is write a new law where all those compounds are made illegal in one step.
Timothy Kirkhope, I mean, this is a particularly European problem. If you look at some of the statistics, for example, in 2008, 75% of global seizures of trafficked drugs precursors were taking place in Europe.
Yes, but it doesn't necessarily start in Europe. We are talking about precursors which are actually coming from outside of Europe. It is the actual detection and work going on in Europe, which actually I think is very commendable at the level at which it's been operating, but not sufficient.
Is it the case that these drugs precursors and then the drugs that they go on to contribute are infinitely more dangerous and perilous to users than the drugs that were being taken by equivalent users 40 or 50 years ago?
Yes, because the technology now is much more advanced. The effects of these drugs, as they end up, as it were, is less known in scientific terms. I mean, we do know of the effects on people, perhaps, but it's not as known as perhaps the original sort of basic drugs that used to exist and which we used to have to tackle. I really find it quite amazing that we have substances which, if mixed in a certain way, can be beneficial in the sense that, I mean, there are lots of anti-flu treatments which actually do have within them elements of certain substances which, if mixed in a different way, are lethal.
And with this sort of cloudy environment or muddied waters, where there's a very thin line between what's legal and illegal, what steps can you take as MEPs? What direction can you go in to try and control this problem?
The first thing we do is we support the Commissioner, Commissioner Reding, and what she said, and the need for us to have, as I think was indicated in the film just then, a need to have a wider register with more of these items on it. Because as I said, anything that is currently listed is illegal when we're talking about drugs or elements and make-up drugs, but anything that is not on the list is thereby legal. And we need to have a wider list to cover some of the newer things that are available now, that have come on through technology and science and so on. We need to have them better listed, and we also need to make people more fully aware of the dangers.
And when you look at the future, what sort of substances are you seeing may well appear on the market, and are they even more dangerous than the ones you see at the moment?
Well, yes. I mean, the difficulty we've got is that people are now experimenting. Criminals know there is money to be made in this. And so they are using their own scientists, as has been said, to try and produce ever more sophisticated drugs with ever more sophisticated effects. They may say that that means that they can control them better and that their use is therefore safer. I would dispute that very strongly indeed. And once the criminal element gets into this, as they are, it's even more dangerous from the point of view of people who perhaps innocently think that what they are doing can be safe.
And just one final thought, because we're running out of time, but the criminal chemist sitting in his laboratory is able to keep one step ahead of the law, because one tiny tweak to a chemical compound would change it from being illegal to within the scope of the law. How do you deal with that sort of problem?
Well, criminals always try to be ahead of the law in any particular area of crime. But in this particular case, at least we will have a better, more comprehensive list of substances for which we can make elements tested, we can look at things, and we can try and make sure that as a result of that, we actually tackle the criminals where they are actually carrying out their criminal activity.
OK, Timothy Kirkhope, many thanks indeed for steering us through this complex question. That, I'm afraid, is all we've got time for at the moment. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.